I've got a couple questions for you. How many here are teaching yoga? Let me see hands. Who are the yoga teachers in the rooms? Okay, all right. Who are here in teachers training? Yay. One looks, yay, there's another one. Okay, good. I always like to ask that question when I have the opportunity, because very often in events like that, you get a fairly broad range of students and teachers trainees in the room, and people who've been dragged here by friends and children. And I like to have a sense of who's in this space, because of course, when you come here, all of you are going to come for different reasons with different intentions, to get certain needs met, to hear certain words. And yoga teachers in the room, you have an amazing platform, and I pray with everything that I have that you use it as effectively and efficiently as possible. And I want to take a quick little moment just to give you a little pep talk, because being a yoga teacher has very little to do with your strength and your flexibility. It has something to do with this desire inward to cultivate community and inspire others into wellness so that they can show up in their own family, in their own lives in a way that's integrated and grounded and strong and focused. And very often we get caught up in the busyness of being a yoga teacher, and we forget that we need to do whatever we can in our own, within our own capabilities, to simply be of service to who's in the room and inspire them to see within themselves the love that you see within them at all times. And so no, take advantage of the environment that you're a part of, because it's through your leadership that you can evoke and support others into their leadership, and that really is what's going to move the needle. So I just want to kind of put that out there, because I had a feeling, looking at what was in the room, that there were some yoga teachers here. So I want to thank you, all of you, for coming out and for supporting this effort. And the reason that I came out here is because, I really had no choice, because Lisa, it was going to happen, so I didn't even bother. I don't argue with Lisa. And I'm a really big supporter, as I hope many of you know, of anyone who's taking action, and when the intention behind that action is mindful and it's organized and it's really set in a very positive and strong intention, it's the least that I can do is to show up in an environment and support those efforts. And so thank you for being willing to use your energy today, your time and your money, to support something that I think is so fundamentally important. But that's not necessarily what I wanted to talk about in the short amount of time that I have you. And I'm going to talk for a little bit, and then I'm going to bring you into a more of a ritualized practice. I wanted to talk a little bit about our role as yogis in the community, that it's no longer appropriate for any of us to wait for our leaders to come up and out, that we actually have to become the leaders that we have been waiting for. That, like I said earlier, the time is now, and we have been being readied for many, many years because of life. And so the only thing that blocks us from really stepping out into the world is very often our self-confidence. That little part of us that thinks, well, who am I? What do I have to say? What can I do? I have no experience. And I want to reframe this a little bit, I hope, for all of us in this room, because right now, more than ever, there is a need for us to get off the mat and out into the world and really make a difference where it's important, in our families and in our communities. It's not enough just to look at wellness in terms of my body, my happiness, my relationships. At one point, you know if your yoga is working, not because it makes your body feel better or your body look better, it's because your life is better. Something has shifted in your ability to be present, even in conflict, where you actually can utilize these tools so as not to get overwhelmed, to stay in your body, to stay in your center, and as a result of being able to be in present time, we're able to make choices that are actually unified, grounded, and meaningful for all. And this is the shift that has to happen. And again, like I said earlier, this has nothing to do with the size of your body or your age or your abilities. This is not about how open your hamstrings get. The practice of yoga is about how open your heart can become. And that does not discriminate. There's no bias around that. So we want to look at what really is the issues of the world. Yoga means to come together and make whole. It recognizes that there's no separation, that everything is connected and interdependent, right? But when we look at the way the world is today, our world, and really a lot of our interpersonal dynamics, operate on what's called a power dynamic of power over. And when power over exists, and it does everywhere in our educational system, our political systems, when power over exists, power under must exist as well. Another word for power under is called oppression, okay? And so we can historically look at all of the issues in the world today, including generational poverty, and understand that it's systematic of oppression. And oppression is built into many of our institutions. It's systemic. So when we look at oppression, often what we will also experience is desperation, as you can imagine. When there's desperation, it can often lead to violence. When there's violence, it will lead to war and death. What we also know about oppression is that when we're not dealing with the emotional ramifications of oppression, that the oppressed become the oppressor. It's just a cycle of things, okay? So, that power over and power under is the opposite of yoga, right? It's separation. And so what's existing in our world today is not yoga. It is the opposite of. So the question I have for you is, do you want an equal and fair, liberated world for all? Yes? Mm-hmm. Would you think it's right that all beings everywhere have access to education, healthcare, dignity, respect? Liars. All of us, including myself. And here's why. Because everything that's happening out there, including all the violence, the war, the terrorism, the oppression, the lack of opportunity, the lack of respect, all of it is a manifestation of our collective thoughts as a global society. Nothing's happening out there that's in a vacuum. So if we want to change what's out in the world, there's only one true revolution, and it begins within. And it's awful. It's humiliating. It is humbling, because it means having to hold the mirror up to yourself and looking at the places in which you're creating separation in your own personal life. So the places where you have developed a power over, power under, where you're creating your own little, again in the micro, your own little oppression, where someone else is wrong so that you can be right. When you can begin to recognize how easy it is to become complicit, how easy it is that we often even benefit from the oppression of others and we don't even realize it because of privilege very often, only then can we begin to truly shift the needle. When we actually, every single day of our life, work diligently to end the ways in which we have systematized oppression in our own life, then maybe we actually change the systems that are in power, that are developing policy today on our behalf. So systems are set up by people, right? Change the people, you change the system. And that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in really inviting all of us to, instead of sitting back and saying, who am I? To saying, why not me? How dare I not? That it's no longer appropriate to presume that our leadership has our best interests at heart. Money is the energy right now that is actualizing so much of the climate of our cultures. So as yogis, what do we believe in? Authenticity, integrity, love, peace. These are the things that are the moral and ethical through line of everything that we do and say and create on the mat. Now we have to hold ourselves accountable when it's not really true in life. So I have so much hope for the yoga communities. I have so much hope. Can you imagine what would happen if we could aggregate this energy? Can you imagine what could happen if we organized as a collective? Can you imagine what would happen if we decided that we're going to put our dollar here with these corporations and not here with these corporations? Can you imagine what would happen if we as a collective decided we're going to hold this politician responsible and put our vote here rather than here? Can you imagine what would happen if as a community we moved the needle and became a constituency? Peace wouldn't be possible. It would be inevitable. That's how big these communities are. And your participation is invaluable right now as it is. It's just you have to decide in your life right now, are you willing to participate? Are you willing to activate? Are you willing to be a voice for change? And are you willing to start that revolution from within and recognize the ways in which perhaps you haven't yet been willing to see beyond your own privilege, to what can happen if you open yourself to the truth of what's happening in our cultures, which is separation is the disease that is poisoning our culture into fear. Why are you here? I don't mean necessarily here at the Yogathon, but why are you doing yoga? For most of you in this room, this is not a part of your culture. That's an assumption. I can't see everyone in this space. But for most of us, this is not our culture. This is not the belief system perhaps we were raised in. I know for myself that from the moment I stepped on a mat and put my palms together and took my first breath and the teacher started to speak, it freaked me out because there was something about the intention that spoke to my soul, and I knew my life would never be the same again. And it wasn't. It took years. Took a process, but in that moment a seed was planted that I knew I was being invited to remember who I already was and to awaken to that truth and actualize that knowing in the physical world. That it was no longer appropriate for me to live in my trauma and live in my limited beliefs and live in the insecurities that keep me separate from the world around. That the yoga practice was going to provide the tools to open my heart so I could listen to the only true teacher that exists, and that's the one that is within our own beating heart. And so the time is over where we give away our power. My job, and yoga teachers in the room, your job, it's not to tell anybody, it's not to teach anyone, it's to remind people of what they already know to be true. Right now in this moment, we are all perfect manifestations of God and grace. And what I mean by that, truth and love. We already know what to do. We already are fully engaged, compassionate, loving people who believe in freedom, equality, happiness, joy for all. It's just who we are. It's in our nature to want to connect. It's in our nature to want to love. But what blocks that capacity for connection? Life, loss, heartbreak, the shadow self, our anger, our fear, our grief, our rage, all the things that make us so fabulously complex as human beings is also the thing that blocks us from our ability to see our lives symbolically and grow and learn with understanding. The yoga practice allows us to shift that energy, not necessarily release the grief, the rage, the fear. It teaches us though how to be in relationship with it, so that every once in a while when we get overwhelmed, when we get triggered, we resource, take a breath, and allow that energy to open so that we can remember who we are and make choices from that knowing. So, everything is connected. No separation. That includes our thoughts and our body. Everything that we think, feel, or experience has an effect on our cellular tissue because everything is energy. All right? Everything is energy. Love is an energy. It's a vibration with information. So is joy. So is happiness. So is rage, so is anger, so is grief, all the things that I mentioned. The reason our worlds operate the way that it does with this power dynamic is because our world is in trauma, meaning the people in our world, including ourselves, have experienced trauma, but no tools to be able to deal or to process or reconcile the trauma in a healthy, embodied, and even spiritual way. Trauma is anything that overwhelms our capacity to cope and leaves us feeling helpless or hopeless. Get that? It's anything that overwhelms our capacity to cope and leaves us feeling helpless or hopeless. What might be traumatic for me might not be traumatic for you, and vice versa. But when an event happens in our life that overwhelms our nervous system, chemicals released from the brain, they enter into our body contracts, and it puts us in fight, flight, or freeze. So now there's an energetic imprint on my body that lets me know, let's say my trauma is hot pink, leggings. It lets me know that hot pink might not be safe for me. So as I evolve and grow up in life, every time I might witness or see hot pink, I might have a physiological reaction and make a determination that not safe or I don't like you or whatever it is because I'm not in present time. It's called I'm triggered or activated. When I'm activated, I time travel to the moment my body first imprinted, and my body it's part of my survival. I want to stay safe. So when we don't have the ability to process hot pink, what do? that energy stays suppressed in the body, and it becomes the tension we experience. Tension, stress, and anxiety are the number one causes of illness today, right? What happens when you practice yoga? You stretch, and you release the tension. Anyone ever have an emotional experience in a yoga class? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I don't mean just grief. Sometimes tears come up. But did you ever get into a yoga practice and all of a sudden you start fidgeting around? You just can't keep still. Or you just feel like you want to check your phone, or you're looking at the person's hot pink leggings next to you and you're like, nice leggings. Or you're fantasizing about food, or the sex you might have one day, had once, whatever it is. Anything to dissociate or distract ourselves from being in present time. Now in life, when we're uncomfortable with our big feelings, we have other things. We have access to food or drugs or sex or alcohol or watching TV or shopping, gambling. There's all sorts of things that we can do to numb ourselves out and disconnect ourselves from the discomfort of that sensation. On the yoga mat, we don't have that. So when feelings start to arise, we find other things to do in our mind to try to take us out of present time. And yet, if we learn how to utilize the practice of yoga to stay in the sensation, the discomfort of the sensation, notice the reactivity, notice the fantasy, notice the frustration, notice the projection. I hate that teacher, I hate the sound of her voice, I like her hair. Whatever it is, projection. Notice all of that within yourself, because the more that you can witness about yourself on the mat, it mirrors to how we deal with conflict in life. So if we can heal the reaction that we have to our discomfort and our trauma here, then in life, when the stakes are high and it really counts, we can stay in our body, we can resource. It doesn't mean we've eradicated the discomfort. It means that we're not letting it run the show. It's like, ooh, I feel that feeling. I'm going to take a breath, feel it in my body. I might need to go home, though, and cry, journal write, rage, to move and discharge the energy. So when we look at our world today, there are not a lot of places where it's appropriate to discharge the tension. So why would we be surprised that there's domestic violence or alcoholism? Why are we surprised when there's systemic oppression, the way that it's set up in the world today? Why are we surprised when there's so much violence? Our nation, our world is enraged. There's trauma that exists that's generational, trauma that's historical, trauma that's ancestral, that all of us inherit. And so it makes sense when you think of it on that terms, why power over would be way more interesting of a choice than submission. So there's a fight. Well, let me get the bigger piece of the pie, because if I don't, then I'm there. So when we look at it this way, we can understand why war exists, why there's oppression, why there's violence. It doesn't make this right, but it means that if we're going to heal it, we have to get real fast. And we have to recognize that none of us are exempt from the oppression that exists. And we have to realize the way in which we often benefit from the oppression, and it's set up in our systems. So we need to start looking at our trauma, our reaction to trauma, how we respond to other people's trauma, and how they experience us. So when we come to an event like this, it's about looking, let's get out in the world and make a difference. Let's go change the world. If I go into an environment that's different than me, different color, different sexuality, different. Now I go in with great intentions. I want to help because I love everybody. But when I walk into an environment that are different than me, am I showing up just alone as Sean? Or am I dragging my entire culture with me and the trauma that the people I'm around may have experienced based on my culture? I need to know that. I need to know that when I engage. Because again, I said it earlier, there's a mythology to this idea that we're all one. On an energetic level, we are, because vibration, love is what connects us. But we're not all one. There are differences that exist. There are some of us who have access and some of us who do not. And as a result, there are pain and suffering for so many souls in the world today. We have to understand that and see how, if we can work within that system, only then can we actually change it. Still making sense? Still following me? So, as an activist, my intention is to get really good at normalizing the conversation around our shadow self and to be okay with our humanity and look to reframe the circumstances of our life so that we can heal. In my spiritual practice, what I'm taught is that we are in these bodies to ultimately become enlightened, all right? I don't know what that word means because it's beyond my 5 sense reality. So the moment I put a word to it, I'm already wrong. But it's the samadhi, it's the release, it's the transcendence of the ego. It takes lifetimes. And it's very much dependent upon experience. For me to become enlightened, I've got to learn about compassion and patience and acceptance and love. I have to really understand all the ways in which my humanity has actually supported the opposite of love. All of these experiences, again, is just life. So, I can't define enlightenment, but the closest I can come to understanding qualities within enlightenment is love. That's why we're here. That's why we're in these bodies, to learn what love is. And depending on our karma, depending on the things that we need to learn, the resistances, the judgment, the fear, the limits of beliefs, we can't bypass it. We have to go towards it to understand it, and only then can we transcend. So in the spiritual practice, we're taught that everything happens exactly the way it's supposed to in order for the individual soul to transform. It doesn't mean it's predestined. It just means that if it happened, it's life. It happened. You can't avoid what is. The spiritual practice says, here are tools, though, to shift your perception so that you can change the way in which you perceive the experience, and as a result, grow, become more aware, more accepting. This takes time, and it's really, really challenging. Blame and victimization are things that our culture has valued and supported. But empowerment through forgiveness, that's something our cultures actually have supported too. What it doesn't support is empowerment through forgiveness without bypass. Do you get what I mean by that? Meaning to actually be in relationship with the rage, the fear, the grief. Feel it, give it life. See the attachment to it. Be human about your experience. And then in time, move towards forgiveness from a truly actualized place. Not from the intellectual, but really from the heart. Because what we learn in time, everybody is here to learn what love is. Everybody is doing the best they can with what little they know based on the trauma they've experienced and the lack of tools that are available. Everybody. And the rate in which each being gets it is between each soul and the God of their own understanding. Our work is to stay on our side of the street and recognize the ways in which we are embodying resentment and hate and anger towards another person, because if we're doing that, what are we creating? Separation. And then who's the problem? Here. So this is the work, this is the challenge of looking at your narratives, looking at your stories and seeing how long I've been holding on to this story. How has it served me? How is it keeping me stuck? How am I using that story to remain disempowered? And what would change in my life if I can actually give that story back to God and create some value and opportunity and, dare I say, gratitude, not in spite of the experience, but because of it. How can I step back and say, I wouldn't have chosen this. I'm not thrilled that this is a part of my experience. And yet, I wouldn't be who I am in the world had I not walked this path exactly as it is. I wouldn't wish it for anyone else in the world, but because it was mine, thank you, because look what I'm going to do with this. My heartbreak taught me acceptance. My whatever your shadow is, whatever it is. Your addictions taught you compassion. Your loss taught you patience. The violence taught you resiliency. None of that could have been learned without the journey being what it was. So how do we call our power back, reframe our story, and develop empathy for ourselves, for the tiny little parts in ourselves that were so shut down. How do we cultivate that empathy? Because I promise you this, if there was one critical piece, that piece, P-I-E-C-E, I think I just spelled that right, maybe. If there was one key or piece that can absolutely move the needle and create peace, P-E-A-C-E, it would be empathy. Empathy. Only when I care about me can I truly care about you. Only when I respect my journey as it is and can have a little bit of a sense of humor about how funky and weird and fabulous life can be, can I then, when you're in your process, whatever that process is, can I hold that space with you lovingly and not expect you to be any other place other than where you are, because it's learning the essential lessons that are going to open your heart to love, self and others. This is how the yoga community changes the world. This is how the mindfulness community changes the world. It's through self-love, self-actualization, self-understanding, honoring, respecting the human experience as it is, honoring the differences that exist, taking advantage of whatever privileges that you have and using it for the betterment of all. When we can do this as a collective, like I said, peace is inevitable. You just have to decide, do you want it, and are you willing to do the work to make it happen? Does it make sense what I just said? Yeah? Yeah? You all good with what I just said? Okay. Okay, so how am I doing with time? I'm very well aware of that. I'm going to get thrown out. Give me a time. I have all day? 24. Okay. All right, I'm doing pretty good. So, how do we normalize? How do we communicate? How do we come to terms with who we are and help support each other? Thinking a lot about my dad lately because I'm writing a book, and right now I'm writing a section of the book about the death of my dad, and which is always interesting to have to walk that through again and again and again. So I want to share a little bit of a story that personalizes it a little bit, and I hope it can help you to understand about that mind-body connection, that trauma, and about the importance of communication and normalizing what is incomprehensible. So my dad died of cancer 5 years ago, and I was very, very close with my dad. He was a yoga teacher, so our conversations were pretty intimate, pretty deep. It wasn't a shallow relationship. It was also pretty, base and everything else that a family has. But there was a lot of depth between my father and I. But coming to terms with my father's dying was very difficult for all of us. And one day, maybe 3 months before my father passed, we're laying in bed together. At this point, my father can barely walk. And we're lying in bed, and my father turns to my mother and says, "Alice, get out of the room. I want to talk to my daughter." So I think that's odd. And my mother leaves, and my father turns to me, holds my hands. He's looking deeply in my eyes. He starts to stroke my face. He's taking me in, drinking me in. He starts to tell me how much he loves me, how incredibly proud he is of me. He starts to tell me about the way I am in the world and what he sees in me as a human being. And I'm listening to this and thinking, where are we going with this? What's happening? And then as he's going on, all of a sudden it occurs to me what's happening. My father's saying goodbye. That this is his moment, and he's probably thought about this for a really long time, and he was ready to do this. I was not ready to do this. So the moment it occurred to me that my father was saying goodbye, I disassociate. Just pop right out of my body, because it is way bigger than my maturity level can handle. And I check out. And I hear a little voice in my head saying, "Seane, this happens once in a lifetime. Get back in your body and you pay attention to your father." I get back in my body, I hear another 4 words, something about regret, gone. Come back into my body, I hear something about forgiveness, gone. When it was over, I realized that I heard maybe 5% of that conversation. My father asked me to go get him a Coke. I go into the hallway, I scream down to my mother to get my father a Coke, and I go into my room and I fall asleep, and I stay there until the next morning. About a week later, I'm laying in bed with my mom and my dad watching TV, and my father turns to my mother and says, "Alice, get out of the room, I want to talk to my daughter." He sits me up, touches my face, tells me how much he loves me, tells me how proud of me I am. I'm thinking, what is going on? I would swear, but I see there's children. And I'm thinking, is it the drugs? Did he forget? Is there something else he needs to say? So the same conversation happens. I keep dissociating. But by the time it's over, I'm present for about 20% of the conversation. I leave the room. I go and get my father a Coke. To make a long story short, 9 times my father says goodbye to me. 9 times in the course of 3 months, I have to sit through a conversation of hearing about regrets and forgiveness and how loved I am. And on this 9th time, I hear 100% of what my father is saying. So much so that we even sit together and organize the playlist for his funeral, which included Another One Bites the Dust and Highway to Hell and Sympathy for the Devil. And and messages that he wants me to include in the eulogy. After it's over, I go downstairs and I say to my mother, if my father says goodbye to me one more time, I'm going to kill him. It wasn't until after my father died that I realized what he was doing. He understood that the trauma that I was going to experience over the loss of the presence of him in my life was going to be unimaginable. He knew that because of my nature, I am very stoic in crisis. I am the person you want around you when there's a crisis because I don't get emotional. I get focused, I do what needs to be done, I take care of everyone and everything around me. My father knows this about me. And my father wanted to make sure that before he passed, that we normalized the conversation of his passing, that we were able to process what needed to be processed, that the energy was discharged so that I could be fully in present time with him, which is the way he wanted to be passed. It didn't occur to me while it was happening. It was only until afterwards. And I know this stuff. And I had no idea how much of life we hold on to because that's how we're raised. We can't live this way because it's not healthy at all. I see the difference between the way I grieved and the way my brothers grieved. The way they held it in their body and the way I was able to hold it in my body. This is the gift that we need to give each other, is to model life. Life, it happens, and it's big, and it's huge, and it's raw, and it's real, and it can be intense, and so incredibly vulnerable. But with the spiritual practice, vulnerability is key, because vulnerability leads to surrender. Not from the head, but from the heart. It's dependent on how we feel, not what we know. So the more we can practice yoga, release the tension, connect with our story, talk, communicate, discharge like crazy, allow for that energy to integrate so that we can see, this is who I am, this is why I'm here, this is what I've learned, this is what I'm taking with me, this is what I'm letting go because it no longer serves the development of my psyche, and this is how big I'm going to love as a result. When we do this, peace, happiness, freedom, equality, the end of oppression. It's a natural extension of who we are. But it's an important story, and all of our narratives are important. We all have a story to share. What we don't want, I could tell that story in a very different way. And that story, I can live that story in a way that you'd be like, oh my God, Sean, I'm so sorry. That's so awful. And I did for a while. It's what we do. But we can also flip any story. I don't care how horrible, traumatic it is. Every story can be flipped in time after we actually go through the process of grieving and rage and everything else that's so beautifully human. We can flip it and see the value and the purposefulness of it, where we can walk away with absolute gratitude and wisdom. The gift my father gave me in that moment was wisdom. You can only learn that through experience, and you all have it. And so you also have a platform, you have families, you have a community. Share your wisdom, normalize the human experience, create space for others to share their story. Don't put yourself above, higher, power over anyone else. Come down to the human level where we live in those dualities of pain and pleasure, of fear and love. All of that makes us who we are. But do not let the shadow determine the choices that you make, or the way you see the world, or the way in which the world perceives you. Because the only thing that is made manifest as a result is separation, which is the end of the planet as we know it. So let's heal it. Let's do the work. Let's commit. That's why I'm so grateful to all the organizers of Yogathon for bringing all of us together in this way, so that we can We can move the needle within ourselves. I hope you go home and just maybe for a day, you feel more empowered and excited and energized, maybe for one day, which will remind you need to get back on the mat tomorrow. Maybe you're able to hold this feeling for 2 days, 3 days. Maybe when you go home, you start thinking, you know what's really important to me? The end of animal violence, or environmental injustice, or domestic violence, or HIV/AIDS. These are things that have touched my heart and my soul. And maybe perhaps because of the fact that I've been so directly influenced and impacted by it, that maybe there's an organization that could use my support or my money or my energy. That engagement is what really allows us all to unite and connect. That's yoga. Relationships. It's not denying the human experience. It's not denying the shadow. It's not denying the suffering. It's not denying that what exists in the world is racism and sexism and homophobia, transphobia, ableism, ageism. All of that exists because of separation. Let's do whatever we can do in our power to change the racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, ageism within ourselves that we inherit from our own culture and history. When we can end that, eradicate it through the knowledge of it, then we can actually do something that's worthwhile and make our time on the mat make sense. Because it'll never be about your flexibility. Never be. That's not what's going to make you happy. Trust me, getting your leg behind your head is not going to bring you joy in the long term. But being able to stand in the presence of another soul and be able to inwardly think, I see you, and to allow yourself to be seen as the soul you are, not your story, not your role, not your identity based on your ego, but your true light, that level of humanity is what can ease our cultures into peace. Questions, thoughts, anything on what I've said before I move on? No, you're all good? You're all good with this? Is this something that you want? Mm-hmm. Is there an example of demonstrating? Yes, so the question is, she's asking me if I have any stories or anything I can narrate around an example of going into other cultures where there's trauma and being able to hold your center around it. I can tell you examples of where I've done it badly and what I've learned from it. And I'll do that briefly, and then what I want to do to close this, you've been practicing yoga for hours, we're going to do more of a ritualized practice. We're going to use our bodies to pray. So it's going to be very symbolic more than it will be physical. So I'll share this one more story. I don't think did I share the Cambodia story when I was here last year? I shared the Uganda story, I think, but not Cambodia. No? All right, so here's a good example. Many years ago, maybe 11, 12 years ago, I go to Cambodia to work with an organization called the Cambodian Children Fund that over the years I've helped to support and fund in a variety of ways. This particular organization there's about 6 different schools or orphanages, and they take children from this garbage dump and bring the children to an environment where they can get food and shelter and education. You don't literally adopt the children. It's not that kind of an orphanage. But this garbage dump at the time was a mile wide and about 100 yards deep. The most oppressive physical environment I'd ever been to. Flies and rats could not live there because of how toxic this particular garbage dump was. There was shacks around the garbage dump where families lived to be able to pick the metal and plastic out of the garbage every day for recycling. A lot of children work there. When I say children, we're talking 2 years old, 4 years old, that work there barefoot, completely exposed to the elements. But a lot of times children were dropped off there by families that couldn't afford the children anymore. And those children were very much vulnerable to predators that would take the children and put them into sex trafficking. And so CCF did a lot of work to help to rescue those particular children, but also be in dialogue with the families to see if they can find a way to take the children away, even though the children were bringing finances in. And they don't separate them from the families, they still have contact, but look up CCF, you'll see what they're doing. So I go, and I've been to oppressive environments before, but not like this, and I'm triggered from the moment I walk in. there's a family that we're in dialogue with, and this small little child comes out of this hut, squats on the edge of the road. The child's naked and defecates, stands up, wipes himself with his hand, and then wipes his hand across his face. There's adults everywhere, and of course no one's going to do anything about it. We had brought food and some supplies for the community, but not enough. So we go to the truck and we're handing stuff out, and there's a moment for me where I'm getting very triggered because I realize I have to start making decisions. Do I give the food to the pregnant woman holding a child, or do I give the food to the 12-year-old with 3 children, and I think maybe that child's the head of a household because the parents have died? So I'm getting triggered. My stuff is coming up, and I just start throwing food. I'm not even paying attention anymore. Whoever gets it, gets it. Can't even make eye contact. Triggered. I'm no longer in present time. My trauma is up. One of the reasons that my friend Scott wanted me there was because there was a young girl they were trying to take away whose father was a severe alcoholic. The mother was 9 months pregnant. The father had just recently beaten the mother so severely. And they were pretty certain that the father was also sexually abusing the children, including this one young child. And so he was hoping that I would be able to be in dialogue with the man and help the situation. Why, I don't know. We go over to the shack. The pregnant woman is on her back and her chest is uncovered. And the little girl is tending to the mother. When she sees Scott and I coming towards, she did the most dignified thing. She takes a cloth and she covers her mother's naked breasts with it so that Scott wouldn't be able to see, which just touched my heart. It was just this level of dignity, even in this environment. As soon as I get to this environment, I'm already triggered. I sit down with the little girl trying to relate to her to some capacity. I'm trying to connect, trying to find something that unites us. And I say to the child, oh, you have a scar like me. She had a scar running through her eyebrow. She cocks her head and she turns her head, and right away I'm overwhelmed with shame because her scar was nothing like mine. Her scar ran across her head, around her ear, and into her jaw. She had been beaten so badly that her scar was a manifestation of this beating, abuse. That wasn't my experience. So immediately I just couldn't believe that I'm trying to equate my little tiny baby scar to this. Shame, inadequacy, anger. The father comes up, he's drunk. I can't even look at him. I cannot even see him, I'm so angry. Scott's trying to engage a conversation. I'm checked out. We leave, Scott's like, what's up with you? I'm like, I don't know, I'm just angry. We walk through the garbage dump. I've got boots up to my thighs so that I don't cut myself with glass. The children are barefoot. And they're trying to navigate so that I don't fall into a hole where there's combustible holes everywhere. There's a woman collecting garbage with a small child nearby her. She looks up and she sees me and turns her head quickly to look for Scott. When she sees Scott, she looks around fast like this, and I know what she's doing. She's looking to see if her husband is around. She realizes that he's not. She grabs her child, throws her towards me, and says in her language, go, go, go. I can't take a child. It's illegal. It's not appropriate. You need permission from the parents. And I'm trying to explain, I can't take your child. And she's crying. And I can see that this is her window. This was her moment. I can do nothing. Inadequate, ashamed, angry. I have to leave her. We go deeper into the garbage dump. 3 children come around me and they're making these gestures. This one's for food. This one's for education. This one for water. And they're using the language to ask to be taken to CCF. They have parents, I can't do it. And I'm trying to explain. And in that moment, I'm thinking, where's God here? See, I believe that God exists in all moments. I believe that God is everywhere. And in that moment, God didn't exist. So I'm thinking, where's God here? And all of a sudden, a child comes up to me. I can't tell if it's a boy or girl. Head is all wrapped up in cloth to protect the child from the sun. And the child reaches out and grabs my hand really tightly. And I look down, and I'm waiting for this child to say food or education or whatever. The child says nothing, just smiles at me. Just this little smile, squeezes my hand really tight and walks away. Child walks away, and I realize the child had actually placed something in my hand. So it was a clump of dirt. I break the dirt away, and inside the dirt is this heart-shaped charm that the child had found in the garbage dump, and I immediately started to sob because I realized that where God was missing was in me. That when I went through that garbage dump, the thing that I forgot to bring with me was my humanity and my love. I was so in judgment about the environment, about the people within the environment, about what was being done. I was so stuck in the limitations of especially my Western belief system, that I forgot to remember I'm in a culture where there's genocide. I'm in the culture where there's deep levels of oppression and trauma that is still impacting these people for generations to come. That is why this human being is drinking alcohol. This is why he's beating his wife, because he doesn't know what to do with the energy. I left all of that behind, and I showed up with resentment and resistance. I was in trauma. I was able to use the tools and the resources, get myself together, and to make a long story a little shorter, was able to talk to both the fathers and got both those young girls. We took them with us that very day. Both those girls, this is 12 years ago. One is in the university. The one that the mother said, go, go. She's now in her second year of the university. The other child was the worst student ever. Horrible student. A social butterfly. Has more friends than you can ever imagine. Loves to storytell and play and draw. Hates school. Do I care? This child who had the weight of the world on her shoulder is just in love with life and experience. So that's my example to that question. You go into these environments, trauma exists. You have to keep yourself in check. The resource starts here. And the recognition that there's mountains behind mountains behind mountains. What you see isn't always the end. What you're seeing is the end result of something else that perhaps you can't see or understand. Go there. Did I answer that? Yeah, okay. All right. So with that, thank you. Thank you. So that's what it's about. It's about the love. It's about, again, that story could have turned out very different, and I would have been here and talked about how messed up the world is, how bad those people are. It's trauma. It's trauma. In that moment, I created separation, and as a result of that separation, you don't think that that man could feel my judgment and my hate? Everything that he does is to affirm that he's worthless, that he's destroyable. I don't want to affirm that. So I better check in when my stuff is up so that I don't participate in that capacity. Okay? All right, so with the time we have left, let's ritualize this a little bit, and let's use this time to send energy outward and use our bodies to pray. Okay? So go back to your mats and come into a cross-legged position. That's problematic. And place your hands onto your heart. And you're going to take a very deep breath in. Exhale it out through the mouth. So we have work to do, each and every one of us, as individuals and as a collective. And the time is now. And we are ready to show up in our lives and in our communities and find our voice and speak our truth and do what needs to be done in order to end the oppression that is breaking the hearts and the spirits of so many of our beings today, especially our young beings. So we have work to do. And the question is, how will you love? How deep will you go? What will you risk? How raw will you get? How real? How alive? How present? Are you willing at this point in your life to reframe your own narrative so you can let go of the limited beliefs that have blocked you from your capacity to love big? Are you ready to be a voice for change? An agent for liberation, a truth teller? Are you ready to be seen? Into your heart, take a very deep breath in. Exhale it out through the mouth. Now go ahead and squeeze your knees into your chest. And you're going to roll to your right side and press up into a seated position. Sitting up nice and tall with your eyes closed, just ground yourself here for a moment. What's magnificent about this moment is that here, right now in Atlanta, there are countless thousands of people, right now, this very second, meditating, or praying, or dancing wildly, or practicing yoga, chanting, or some form of expression that we might not be familiar with. Right now, in this very moment, we join these souls on the etheric in our intentions and in our prayers. But imagine right now, in this moment, throughout the whole of our nation, millions of beings. And in the world, millions upon millions. There is a level of internalized activism that is happening when like-minded souls come together to unite, to transform fear into love, and to hold a place within our hearts where peace is possible for all beings everywhere. In this moment, we're not singular in our intention. There is power to this collective, and it's a power that in this moment right now you're participating in. Your energy, your body, your essence, your experience is invaluable, and it's necessary. We are, each and every one of us, so incredibly blessed that we get to do this. When so many people in the world would literally be jailed or killed for being in this kind of dialogue. Literally. But that's not our pathway. So how dare we not go in? How dare we not dig deep? How dare we not call our power back and remember who we truly are so that we can be of service and change this world? Place your palms into Namaste. So we invoke into this space, into our hearts, the God of our own unique understanding, be it your higher power, the creative consciousness, Mother Earth, or the Holy Mother herself, but to this grace we ask. May this practice, and from this point forward, all of our subsequent practices, be an opportunity for transformation, healing, and awakening to occur body, mind, and spirit. May we have the commitment and the resiliency to do the work on ourselves so that we can transform all of our limited beliefs, including our resistance, our judgment, and our fear, and instead shift that resistance into surrender, that judgment into understanding and compassion, and most certainly our fear into faith. And may that faith be the aspect of self that moves us forward on our path into our awakening. We ask, may this practice be blessed. And may the vibration that's cultivated touch the hearts and souls of all beings everywhere. We dedicate this practice to all of our brothers and sisters who in this moment are dealing with unimaginable oppression. To our brothers and sisters in Iraq and Iran, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, Egypt. To our brothers and sisters in Israel and in Palestine. To our brothers and sisters throughout Africa and Europe. To our brothers and sisters right here in the United States, who every single day are confronted with the indignity of racism and sexism and homophobia and transphobia and ableism and ageism. We hold all these beings sacred within our hearts. We ask, may our leadership wake up. May they do what needs to be done so that all beings are free and happy and safe, liberated, transformed, free to love whom they choose, create in the way that speaks and serves their soul. We ask, may all these beings know safety and have access to the resources necessary so that they can be healed and happy in all ways, always. To all these beings, in the name of love and peace, we dedicate this practice to you with a single Om. Take a deep breath in. Om.